it's sort of associated with my, you know, I started my personal story, my personal mining story, and I discovered the value of education 3,800 feet underground with a light strapped on my head. So I arrived in the mines with an incomplete high school, but it took me about 2 months of mining to figure that what I needed was education and as much as I could get my hands on. It was a life-changing experience. Actually, a pretty good experience. I never recovered my earning potential. It's interesting. Yeah. 1968, I made enough money in 1 year of mining in Sudbury to acquire 4 Corvettes. Just to put it in perspective. You know, right?
The Townsend are helping you.
Yeah. I didn't buy the Corvette. I really liked the Lotus Europa, but it's a different side of me. Okay. So, 4 sub-themes: flexibility, training, open to broad range of sectors. Thunder Bay is blessed with 2 first-class post-secondary institutions. And I think not only are they high-quality institutions and you know, can be favorably compared with any institution in the province and any institutions in the country. For a community of the size, the college offers a range of programs which is truly astonishing. And so, you know, if you have, like, so first observation is there's this huge asset in your post-secondary institutions, and it's probably one of the features that makes the economy of the region as dynamic as it is. And we'll come back to that in the third theme. But so, you know, if I was, I'm not sure I could offer anything that you know, that could improve in terms of the question of opening, you know, courses that are available, flexibility of courses. Given the size of the population, I think, you know, it's very good. So if there is something that needs to be done, you'll have to tell me, because the story that I heard and took away was one that was very impressive. Working with employers, it bifurcates in the Thunder Bay area. So there are a couple of the large employers which are active. You see them kind of connected to different committees, and they participate in terms of the labor force planning, workforce planning, skills development with the actors in the community. There's a large pool of small and medium enterprises that have, how do we say, less continuous connection with the educational institutions, the employment groups, and are not by nature predisposed to do long-term skills planning. So that's now that story is uniform in every location that I visit. So there's nothing particular about Thunder Bay, with the exception that you have a number of employers that remoteness is added on, and that is a unique feature. So it's complicated by the fact that it's not 15 minutes drive to employers. So if I'm in Hamilton, the geographic space that people are working, they talk about drive to work, and we were joking that this is a fly to work area. It's just the region is large. So that's what the working with the employers on training is about. So I'm not sure that I will be able to offer something constructive in how to increase the connection between small and medium enterprises and training with the actors, the three big actors, the economic development, employment, and training actors in the area. I'm not sure that I can offer something constructive. What I can offer is that it's probably, again, in terms of the longer term planning, is it's absolutely essential that those connections be established quickly with the mine operators for the mining readiness, and that they remain quite deep, because it's an industry which is subject to disruptions. So if we just use cliffs as the example, is that I think in the time that I've been on the study since November, the date for the mine opening has been changed 3 times. So, so that, and I would expect more of those. And that's the nature of that kind of a business. And I think the only way that the region can hope to benefit from the extractives is with having very, very deep connections and even kind of agreements with the operators around how their recruiting develop, their labor force. And I know, John, I think you're trying to work through some things on your side with that would almost take on the idea of a formal agreement with operators. But I would say that I would argue that should be broadened. Yeah.
Thomas, besides the mining, the large employers, so we have 7,200 some small, medium-sized enterprises in Thunder Bay District. And the issue of training and employers and subsidies and the government role, it's ongoing, and it's always changing due to the apprenticeship program, and especially in Ontario, you hear that even though there's more intervention, more money, not enough. Have you been able to get a handle on that component? Because the mines and other large employers have the resources to go and do the training they need, but the small, medium-sized companies don't. And a lot of that will be contingent on the government ability to partner and provide some long-term solutions.
I was actually hoping that Quebec would give some insights into potential policy options in that regard, because Quebec has a policy of essentially taxing corporations based on their it's the gross salary.
Yeah, gross salary.
Gross salary, and so that money can be pooled and it can be used to provide training that could involve combinations of workplaces. So, but there are a number of things that are happening with that program that suggest that the small and medium enterprise issue is still one that we're wrestling with from a policy perspective.
Yeah.
So
That's what we...
How about best practices globally in other jurisdictions like Germany that have more of a culture of apprenticeship where it has proven successful that we can learn from? Is your study going to incorporate some of those best practices?
that was our conversation at the break, is Germany's not in the study.
Okay.
And I think from Canada's perspective, it's a federation, it's a highly decentralized, so education is a state responsibility in Germany. There's a lot of features that would make Germany a very attractive partner in this study for us. And I think you're going to have a go at them. But right now they're not.
There's also an issue of capacity since we have already 12 countries to review as part of this project, just one among other projects of LEED, but certainly Germany is a good case.
But Randall, you and I could
Yeah. The other country that we have involved is Ireland, and they have quite an interesting initiative. It's called SkillNets. And what they're a consortium of small and medium-sized enterprises that get together around a sector, for example, and they pool their investments, and then they actually give their staff workplace training opportunities that way. So this is something I think Ontario actually needs to build, because you have a demographic crunch. A lot of people are getting old, and the people who need the training are already working, and most of them are working in small and medium-sized enterprises. So how do you penetrate those? And what we've seen in other OECD countries is that definitely when the employers come together and pool their investments, it's able to allow staff off to do the training, right? So.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the employer's perspective, because the employment advisors that we work with, they work very closely with employers, and some of the messaging from employers, particularly with small businesses, and we see it often locally with some of the larger corporations and larger businesses coming in, is closure of small businesses. And also, just due to some of the expenses of operating a business in the Thunder Bay area, taxes and even just a cellular bill or marketing, it's $500 expense a month. So for some of the small businesses, they're really losing out on the opportunity, and we have seen an increase in closures of small businesses. So just looking at the Ontario Self-Employment Benefit, we see that that's a very effective program, but there needs to be that support from a community level in order for people to sustain those small businesses. So I'm just wondering if that's something we can maybe talk about or address. Furthermore, with the apprenticeship piece, particularly with some of the employers, is that it's the allocation of time and resources. So the employment advisors, they're working hand in hand with those employers, educating them about the need for apprenticeships and what that looks like. But when it comes to the accessibility for the individual to go on training, it's not offered locally. I can give you an example in the Marathon area. We had an apprenticeable opportunity for the grocery store to be a meat cutter. In order for that employer to do the apprenticeship piece, they have to send the individual to Southern Ontario. So looking at some of technology and some of the ways that we can sort of pick up those pieces and do things from a distance would certainly allow employers to access those and not be at such a disadvantage.
Yeah, and I mean, to some extent, if there is a possibility of doing that at distance, you're already doing brilliant things in the healthcare field, right? So it's not like the technology's in place. People understand how those kinds of technologies operate. You've got a very sophisticated university in that, so that there might be some opportunity to do something there.
But on that issue on the meat cutter, so the local college here doesn't offer a program, is essentially clear.
No, and it's very difficult to run programs like that if you don't have large interests. So this is one person 4.5 hours from the main campus.
Right.
So how do we reach out to those individuals? The other piece of that is that in order to do the registration piece for the apprenticeship, it's quite a challenge as well. The closest consultant is in the Geraldton area. So as an employment service in that area, I would like to challenge or have conversation or look at that missing link, because we have staff that are working with the employer, working with the client, so if we could actually figure out a way to actually facilitate that apprenticeship piece by signing the contract. We know the job, we know the safety of that job, we know what to look for, the training and that whole piece. So now we're bringing a third party into it to say, can you sign the papers?
Yeah.
So I mean, I would like to really explore that from a management perspective.
Okay, so that's kind of a concrete example of delegating some authority locally that just allows you to do your job better.
Absolutely, and we have that relationship already established in that trust.
And how many people in this region participate in apprenticeship programs generally? Are they quite a popular career path, or?
Well, we have the lowest apprenticeship rate right now for all of the province. So I talked to Mark Scott a little while ago, saying that as an employment service, that is one of our big priorities for this year. Before it was second career and so forth, but there's a huge gap in that apprenticeship piece. So my interest to manage my team is to really look at that, and we signed 5 apprenticeships last month. Well, in the last 2 months, just from our agency. Although with that said, again, it's one of those things that the funding is not there to support it. So we look at our overall budget. The policies say you can give the employer $1,000 to start the apprenticeship, when everything is signed, and at the 6-month mark, another $1,000. If we do a subsidy because the individual is, really needs a lot of training, and, it may result in the apprenticeable piece, now we're looking at a subsidy, to try to prove to the employer that this person is worthy of all of these things. So from an agency perspective, financially, we cannot sustain what we're being told to do. We want to, we can do it, but we don't have the resources to even publicize what our guidelines are saying. You know, $2,000 to an employer.
And maybe therein lies the solution, because you mentioned as an agency you can't, but I mean there's numbers of agencies here that I think if, and we look at that example of the meat cutter, there are probably, with the 9 First Nations that we work with, there are probably a number of individuals that would like to do and aspire towards being a meat cutter, getting into that apprenticeship. So maybe if we look at how as agencies there might be ways to collaborate, to demonstrate to the college that yes, we can find 10 or whatever their number is to run a meat cutter program in this region. So there may be, and that might be a different quadrant, but that's capacities that.
And I think these are like the how you get things done, whether the solution is technology, if it's flexibilities, it may be in the other one, but this is simply a tool that guides us into what can we constructively offer as some courses of action that might improve the system. So, and I think the bottom line are really the observations and the recommendations.
But in terms of you, like when you're saying you need to collaborate more, so what would you need to do that? Do you need like a database that you can speak to each other? That I have a person that wants to do this, or is it a committee, or is it more just the informal network, making sure that you know?
Well, funny you ask, because I think there's a few of us in the room we're involved with a Employment Plus network, or a network of agencies that are gathering to collaborate, and maybe this is a topic that we look at those areas. And I'm just using meat cutter as an example, but if apprenticeships are in demand, as we hear about on a regular basis, what are those particular areas that are in demand? And if meat cutter is one of them, well, where are the populations that could help, that have that interest? And that's key too, because in some instances, the assessments, when we look at assessing individuals, and in some cases, because we're funded to do a certain type of a program, there's a push to say, well, is this something that individual wants to go in? And sometimes it's just that, it's a push. That shouldn't be the way. They should have that interest rather than pushing them into a certain program. So if there's a genuine interest from an assessment that, yes, this individual has that capacity, that ability to work in the meat cutting field, and there's a demand in the region, and maybe that's where different organizations can work and see if there's enough supply to warrant the college, because the college has to break even. They have to figure out a way to make sure that program is balanced. So if it's 10 or 12 or whatever number, maybe there's a way as organizations we can work towards that.
The adult literacy program, one of the goal paths is apprenticeship, but for Northwestern Ontario, for the new literacy services plan starting April 1st for 2013-14, only 5% of learners identified the reason for their skill upgrading is to reach an apprenticeship goal. So it's very small, but yet if you look at approximately, say, 2,200 adult learners in the program, and you take 5% of that, you're looking at over 100 people. So then if you drill down and say, what type of an apprenticeship are you interested in, then perhaps what we're talking about can be made possible. You might have enough numbers to actually do a class. But again, distance, of course, is going to be one of the challenges.
I think one of the areas too is there's a lack of knowledge or understanding about apprenticeships. With the Passport to Prosperity no longer in existence, and OEAP trying to do the best that they can, I think to ask a group of people, are you interested in apprenticeship, is not effective, because they don't have that basic level of understanding of what is it, what does it look like. And until we're able to give them that information through a one-on-one assessment, we first have to have them come through our door to be able to provide them with that information, or have programs like Passport to Prosperity, and getting employment services into the schools, and then they're coming in with the knowledge base to say, yeah, I do want apprenticeship.
And sorry, the careers advice from the high school to to the employment service or to the college, would you say it's good, or in terms of the counselors playing an active role in giving youth information about apprenticeship opportunities in the region?
We're actually, from the school to us,
Yeah,
from the high school to us,
yeah.
no.
Non-existent.
No, we, like, I don't want to say we, but I think employment services, the staff of employment services have a very good understanding of apprenticeship,
Right.
you know, and maybe better than anybody else in the community at this point in time, other than the ministry consultants. That's just my thought, though.
On that note, my son's going into high school. He's very interested in getting into the apprenticeships, wants to get into carpentry. I'm working in North Superior Workforce Planning Board, and I don't really know how to direct him. I don't know where to go. I don't know, okay, so there's not Passport to Prosperity anymore. I can't send him to an employment agency because he's 13, and really, I don't want him working yet. Next year he could start paying the bills, but I don't have that right information. And that's a huge problem, even at the high schools, that there may be one counselor or two counselors, but, you know, how am I don't even know how to do that.
You can come to employment services, to yes or to no.
13?
Yep.
Yeah. And even for you,
That's good.
even for you to go to them and talk to them, like the answers are out there.
Oh, no, I have,
Yeah.
but, you know, he wants to know what kind of, his big thing right now is, what do I need to do in university to do this? What do I need to do in university to do this? Because I'm one of those parents, I go to university, sorry. Yeah, so I'm trying to direct him.
No, we'll be part of our outcomes. But we're here to help.
And we're not preoccupied with outcomes here,
No.
right?
But we do want to help.
Yeah, I'll just grind that axe a little.
There is a shift beginning to happen, but it always comes after the fact, right? Because for years we know, through the high schools, they were not promoting apprenticeships. It was
Yeah.
all academic. And so now they've realized that, given the shortage, that obviously that wasn't a good thing. So the shift is beginning to happen, but it's not going to happen fast enough for a lot of people. So yeah, grasp every straw you can to get the information.
But
you
they're
need.
still academics in high school, and their knowledge of apprenticeship is extremely limited. And that's the reality. They didn't come from a background that was characterized by that kind of knowledge. They went to universities. That's where they were educated. And if you talk to any counselor, high school counselor in Thunder Bay, they really are limited as to the knowledge that they have.
Which is interesting because we're a blue-collar community, by and large, and the last generation, my parents' generation, like my dad's a mechanic, and my brother's a mechanic and stuff, and so there is a mentality, and statistically, we have a higher rate of apprenticeship attainment than the rest of the province do. We have a lower university attainment, but so all the factors indicate that we should be achieving apprenticeships and going into them, but I think the biggest problem, and everyone says this all the time, is the opportunities for apprenticeship as well. So there's a disconnect in knowledge of how to get into an apprenticeship, but then the larger issue is, okay, so I want to do an apprenticeship, where's the opportunity for it? And employers aren't taking it on, and well, anyway.
It's a generational
Yeah.
issue, because I think in terms of, again, if I use my personal story, is the kitchen table conversation. In a blue collar environment is get a university degree so you can get a job in a place where it's warm and it's stable and all of those things. So the signals that our parents were sending us were very strong, and we took away, that it was university or nothing. My oldest son announced that he was going to go to Algonquin College. Okay, I'm running the learning programs for HRSDC. It was like driving a stake through my heart. I recovered, but it was like, and now he has a university degree and all's forgiven. But it's sort of like mentally, at one level, professionally, I'm promoting something, but emotionally, when it gets down to my family members, I want a particular kind of.
Well, from my personal experience as well, my dad has, terribly sore back most of his life. He's been cranking wrenches all of his life, and he's dissuaded my brother from going to become a mechanic. And so when he was in high school, he said, go to university, go to university. My parents, that was the message they always drove home, which is what most parents do who are in blue collar careers, because it's often miserable work, right? Even though he loves his job. But my brother was mechanically inclined, and so he did 2 years of mechanical engineering, and he hated it. And then he said, I'm going to go into mechanics. And now he's working for Hydro One and doing quite well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so.
I'd actually like to propose some type of pilot project for Northwestern Ontario when it comes to employment services and apprenticeships. And I don't know who would be, like, where to go with that, but I would be perfect. We'll be here till midnight.
I will add, though, that there was a project, a funded research and development project funded through TCU that just ended March 31st, and it was supporting apprenticeship completions, models of service delivery. Phase 2 was submitted, and we received feedback from the ministry asking if we would consider making a few adjustments. Those adjustments were made, that project was resubmitted, and so we're just waiting to hear when announcements are being made. And it's to follow up with the phase 1, and it is going to be piloting certain, consulting with employers and the various different stakeholders, and then piloting certain models, but particularly in remote regions, again to address the distance aspect that, Sioux Lookout, well, Sioux Lookout isn't really a good example because they're connected really well with Confederation College, but Moosonee, for example, isn't as connected to a college, say, to support apprentices for that academic portion, the classroom portion. So some of that work is being done. But certainly there could be a lot more done in terms of apprenticeship.
Is there a role, like the Ontario College of Trades, for example, I think it was established a year or two ago. It's quite recent anyway. What is the opportunity for that college to play a strong role?
It actually just was officially, for lack of a better word, launched April the 6th. Like, it's been in the process of development,
Right.
but it's just now been launched, and we're hoping that there's going to be a lot of positive outcomes, but again, it'll take a bit of time.
Yeah, to my knowledge, the college is kind of responsible for the program aspect of things, like the standards and evaluation and that, and the ministry remains responsible for the individual registration and completion and that kind of thing.
And there was Jonathan, before we move on, you asked really a question about how networks function, and the question about, how people come together. One of the things we observed, I think there will be a section in the report on networks, and sort of under kind of the work in progress title of Networks Matter. For a couple of reasons. One is, I've talked about getting these three big sort of groups of actors to work more closely together. But as well, there are things that can be done by the policy groups, so out of trying to sort of what we call network stimulation. Mm-hmm. And typically, networks do not form well if you're coming together to exchange information and then you decide to do things. They tend to form because there's a purpose in coming together and then you exchange information. And so that the notion of delegation of authorities and network stimulation is quite important. Mm. So, there's part of what can be done is to stimulate network formation is you actually give people a piece of concrete business to accomplish. So that, I think that's one of the things, and we see that actually where there are, and in Quebec, some of the networks actually have, they have to make decisions around funding, or they have to make, and those networks tend to be quite robust. I think Randall was raising the question about the network in the absence of having a concrete piece of business, can it actually, sustain itself? So, okay, back to work. You've got Maritimers in Northern Ontario, let me talk. Matching people to jobs and facilitating progression. There are two aspects of the focus. One is the notion of the kind of the employment service piece, job opening, skills, doing that kind of matching. This is the area, though, where we talk a lot more about notions of skills utilizations. And there are two dimensions of it. One is progressions of skills within firms. Okay, so, you know, I hire on and then I can progress through the company. And what is the relationship between training and the company supporting training and the progression of someone's career within an organization? And then more broadly at a macro level about continuous learning throughout the life course, so that people basically acquiring skills and then moving. So here the systems that are currently in place and strong tend to deal mostly with people who are unemployed and looking for employment, and less with people that are currently employed and looking to progress either within a company or more broadly within the economy. And it creates a problem that you observed in the first section, and that is that people are getting, between the actual job openings that are appearing and the skills that people are possessing, that gap's getting larger. And the difficulty is that it's difficult to train, like if, let's say we had something like a literacy scale for skills, and we had 5 different grades. If the skill opening's at 3 and the person's at 1, the training challenge is very large. You're much better to deal with someone who's at 2 that you're trying to get to 3, but what it means is a much more dynamic labor market than the labor market that we actually observe locally. So that there's some rigidities in the employment part of the labor market in terms of progression that's doing 2 things. One is that we're probably having to provide more training than optimally we should, because we're training for larger gaps. Yeah. And that what's happening is people are staying at the margins of the labor force because people are kind of hanging out in the lower skilled occupations, like those ones that the people that are unemployed could in fact meaningfully occupy, because the people that are in them aren't moving. So if we can kind of get a little more movement in the piece everywhere, then that would produce a more effective labor market. That will be hugely important for the region if there's a large demand for skills that comes from a rapid expansion of the mining sector, because the supply of skills of those people that are already working is by and large a better fit for what the operators will be looking for than the people that are currently unemployed. So you can, it's not an either or, but that skills pool, and that can benefit the region tremendously if you can kind of free that up, because there will be a kind of a drafting effect for the people that are currently unemployed into those jobs that are vacated. You're shaking your head.
Well,
I know there's
I'm optimistic, but at the same time realistic, because I know if let's say some of the ring of fire activity does happen, there's a likelihood there will be scavenging from existing mines to fill the new mines' needs. And then at the same time, if the need is, let's say, 2017, we have a gap here. We've got an opportunity to train up or to skill up. But in some cases, if we look at the First Nations population, the average education level is maybe grade 9, grade 10. So there's only a certain amount of positions that they're going to be able to aspire to, because in fact, less than 5% of those vacancies in the mining sector are for those with less than grade 5. Right. So we need to realistically look at that and see who has those abilities to aspire to those positions. There may be newcomers. There may be others that have that capacity, but unless we use this window of opportunity between now and, let's say, for Noront with 2015, 2016, and Cliffs just beyond, if we don't use this opportunity now, there's going to be a lot that aren't going to be able to aspire to those positions, and then those that are coming in and flying out without any, as you said, opportunities for those that are in this region or close by. So I'm optimistic. Yes, hopefully industry and others can come together to identify how to reach that goal. But the time is ticking.
Yeah, and it's not an exclusive, like, it's not an either-or proposition I'm presenting. So I'm not saying, like, don't do skilling in anticipation of jobs for people that are currently at the margins. And I think there's some strong arguments, your clients at one level, of seizing the opportunity to gain participation in the benefits of development, and probably necessary participation if there's going to be development. So it's not about an either or, but there needs to be corresponding work done on the broader labor force at the same time. So I'd say, like, you know, if we were doing exclusively trying to train for all of those jobs, I think we'll find that people come from outside. One of the things that's hampering the region from kind of looking at a broader macro picture is there's virtually no supply information. So the reports that were being given in terms of what's happening in the region are all demand reports. So, you know, employers in these industries are anticipating these vacancies over the next while. And I said, well, what does the skill profile look like of people in Thunder Bay relative to those? There's no information. So there's no supply information. And what will happen is the system, the labor market system in the region will shift very quickly from a demand-driven system to a supply system. Now, the employers will react by making decisions. I can source it here, and that's cool, or I can source it somewhere else, and, you know, they basically will start organizing around that. And once they start sourcing outside the region, the experience with places like Fort McMurray and Estevan in Saskatchewan is they just basically go, hey, once I've got the 737 fueled and starting in Newfoundland, I touch down one more time, it doesn't matter. And you can literally get the region shut out from, you know, their thinking just stops about sourcing locally. Yeah.
Add to that the complication of not only sourcing outside of the region, but temporary foreign workers.
Right.
And you add the complication of temporary foreign workers into a mix where they're not even from the country, they're not immigrating to the country with the purpose of staying here, it's coming to work and leaving.
Yeah.
With
Well, I mean, the example of the long wall mining in British Columbia,
BC,
right? Like I said.
and now, I mean, Royal Bank for that matter.
RBC.
Yeah.
So it's not people that have committed to the country and applied for landing and want to stay. It's coming in at 2-year maxes and leaving again.
And this is kind of the super downside of globalization.
Exactly.
And it's a kind of outsourcing,
Yep.
right? It's,
And that's probably where those commitments and the discussions with employers long before any development starts needs to happen.
yeah. Now that side of the equation is weak, and I would say that because of the way the questions are asked, it actually reflects better if you were looking at this and saying, well, you know, there's only a little bit of white there. There's actually a lot more white probably there than thinking. It's the way the questions are asked. And the last one is we've really been kind of getting into the notion of joined up approaches to skills. And this is the need for the economic development people in particular and employers to be working much closer with longer term planning and how we solve the problem together. Because if the employers are left again with, I'm making a point of time decision to hire, so either skills are here, not here, I go elsewhere, versus as an operator in this region, I have a commitment to the people and to the region, and I'm prepared to work with the other actors to kind of, you know, so I'm going to have to give a bit on my side so that some of those gaps, rather than just simply complaining about it and then going elsewhere, the first order of conversation is what can we do about it from a skills upgrading perspective to resolve that problem. If those kinds of agreements are in place, I think we'll do better. So that's the last element of this. tapped out on VET? Wanna move on? Okay. So this is basically targeting policy, you know, to the local sectors. And the first item, I'm sorry, I might just, I'll put my glasses on, I don't need to. In terms of the provision of important local employment sectors to global trends and challenges, I think you guys are living that, you know, full on. And the piece there that I think is largely contributing to sort of what we're seeing is this coordination and collaboration feature that we've been talking about throughout the piece. So there, I think there are, I guess, two things. One is, do you have the tools locally, okay, to be able to address what we're talking about? The short answer is you have insufficient tools in order to be able to do that. The nature of the challenge of the region and the uniqueness of the challenge is not a particularly good fit with existing tools because they're largely designed for negative adjustment, and you're about to go into a growth phase. And so you're going to be working increasingly with tools that are not a good fit for what you're trying to do. So that's that story. 3.2, employers on skill utilization and productivity. We talked about this so this is the employer side of the VET question that we dealt with in the last slide. Now, there, I'm just saying, why is it so good?
Well, it would be good because our assessment must have said that the universities or colleges are actually actively working with employers to organize training which would more effectively utilize the skills of their employees. So I think that we would be interested to talk to you about that if that actually is happening.
Yeah.
Or even beyond,
Or even
working with
beyond,
employers to help them to identify what are their, you know, what they could improve in their work organization, if it were.
You know, my preoccupation, the reason I've hesitated on this is that you're dealing with that 7,000, right, that you mentioned of SMEs, that there doesn't appear to be a lot of contact with. So if you factor them in, is the situation as good, and to what extent is the college able to connect with those SMEs, or are they dealing primarily with the larger employer groups?
I think you may have seen a renaissance of focus on entrepreneurship in our city and region due to places like Innovation Center really pushing that part. There's angel investing, the Chamber of Commerce. Our studies that now are focusing on that, you know, where the jobs are coming from, that we are basically 85% of our business comes from SMEs. You know, some of the studies that we have been presenting out there are highlighting that. So there's a convergence of factors, and I think that you're picking up some of those that we have seen trending up in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of entrepreneurship. Now, is that translating into new wealth creation, new job creation? It's hard to say. Some of our studies are trying to measure that so that we can follow it and follow those trends.
We picked that up in 3.3.
Yeah.
And we've kind of, you know, we're basically saying on the entrepreneurship piece, there's a first-rate job being done here, and probably, again, like the region is punching above its weight in terms of, if you think of the size of the region, in terms of the number of activities that we could point to that we're promoting and supporting entrepreneurial activity. And I think that's probably necessary.
So Jonathan, what was your question though as it relates to employers?
So I mean, it's a question of how much is done to actually work with employers on looking at how they structure their organization in such a way that they're more effectively utilizing the skills of the people. that are working there. So, for example, in Australia, if an employer is reporting a skill shortage, they don't automatically design a training program to respond to that. They actually go in and look at what are the job tasks, what responsibilities are each individual being given, and then there's a consulting phase that happens where they look at maybe it's improving the structure of the organization, which would ultimately lead to a more productive organization, and give the individual skills training as well to upgrade.
It may fall outside of the parameters. You talked about scope earlier, but in Northwestern Ontario, there's an HR association of over 250 Northwestern Ontario HR professionals, and those folks would probably be the ones that would help identify what they would typically do if there was a gap, if there was a need. But yeah, that's a whole group in itself that,
Right, yeah.
that could probably give you some insight.
And Quebec's actually targeted specifically human resources management as a key area to provide companies with assistance. Part of the broad employment services that are offered in Quebec is saying you can't really deal with the skills issue unless you have a conception and a set of practices around HR management. And so they actually provide training for employers and the management team.
Yeah, because when we're talking about skill shortages or labor shortages, and we're looking at the data, we discover that very often the enterprises or the sectors that are complaining are actually having huge human resources management problem, like an awfully high rate of turnover, for one thing. So, of course, you can't solve a labor shortage under those conditions. You will always have a labor shortage if you can't have a decent, let's say, turnover rate.
As part of the contract for employment services, we have that human resource consulting piece with employers. Right now, what I find a trend is that we're more reactive to the employer's needs, sort of helping them with backfilling positions and just reacting to what's happening internally. But certainly looking at moving more towards being proactive and doing that, we could be looking at that as part of our services, because again, the relationship is established with those employers, just it's kind of backwards right now.
Yeah, and it's a again problem of how you're measured, right? Is that it's part of your overall contract, but your pay for performance is not about the consulting with employers on HR.
Five of my counselors are human resource graduates, so they have the resources and the skills to do just that.
Mm-hmm.
It's broken into the job search component and the job developers. And so we're measured, about 70% on the job search side, and 30% of those clients are going to the job developers. So,
but in terms of the skills utilization, that's something you probably just do. It's not necessarily an explicit policy, right? Or would you say, is it an explicit policy coming from the provincial or federal level saying that we need to work on these things, or is this just something that your organization is doing because you have that capacity?
it is in our guidelines. Part of, like our client services, it is the employer piece is part of that, and I can see more movement moving forward to the employers, especially with what's happening in the economy, as being our primary clients. But when you look at the way the program is set out, it's not set out specifically for that purpose. So in order to assist the clients to gain employment in some of those shifts, as approaching employers with that human resource consulting, I can see a large growth in that area.
Something interesting that happened in this neck of the woods is that the players are changing. So when a mill is purchased by a foreign interest, when they're trying to recall the people that have been laid off and are still remain unemployed, they're not meeting the minimum criteria for these new players. So there's
So you used to, the same, it looked like the same job, but it isn't.
It's not, yeah. And I tend to think that'll happen with this competitive nature of the mining as well, with the takeovers that usually happen. It's an opportunity, you know, the challenge becomes someone else's opportunity, but again, those jobs won't be what they were the previous employer. So just something interesting that we've noticed.
And are the HR decisions are not being made locally? Like, so these are corporate decisions that are being made at corporate headquarters in terms of the job requirements?
Well, globally, because
Yeah.
these are globals, right?
Yeah.
So on a community level, it's really the commendable work of the service providers that try to get in there and develop those relationships that can adjust somewhat those opportunities.
So the last element on this has to do with the...
Sorry, just on this issue, I mean, I was wondering whether the community colleges, because they are so present here, would they play a role on helping firms to get more productive, on assisting companies and revisiting their work organization or production process? Because this is what we would have seen also in Quebec, is that that would be the colleges that would play this role and not so much the government service.
I can maybe comment a bit on the college sector. My superior, he actually oversees many projects, particularly with the mining industry. So they're actually in communities providing training directly on the job. They're all over the North Shore. So it is happening, absolutely, and they're actually composing pre-apprenticeship programs. They're looking at the academic piece. They've got a lot of the pre-mining programs, forestry. So they are connected.
To what extent is there a connection between the employment services and the colleges, so that there's a seamless process as much as possible, where an employer coming to see you wants to find somebody, but you realize that there's a lot of turnover in the firm, and that maybe their needs may be better addressed by a more in-depth assessment of how they work with their employees, or if there are skills gaps, and that might be better addressed by the college. So is there such connection?
I'm going to say yes, just because we've kind of had that whole experience with the colleges with second career. So we really had to develop that working relationship and understanding the programs and the ins and outs and the accessibility of programs. So the employment counselors are connected with what the college has to offer. I think that there could be more emphasis put on how do we develop an appropriate program should the need be addressed. So knowing what it is.
The colleges, and to some extent the university, they have divisions or departments within to help. But I think just because we have contracted with the college and the university before, that there are opportunities for growth, and be it an assessment tool, a better connection as it relates to essential skills, better as it relates to culturally sensitive. There are things that need to be looked at, and it comes down to funding. I think everybody has that intent to do well, but when there's only limited dollars, it's hard to fit all those factors.